Thank you for joining us today. I'm Pooja Shah. I'm a financial advisor with Castlefield. As you know, Castlefield is a family of financial advisory and investment management businesses with a focus on our clients' values and aspirations. Today, I'm really looking forward to speaking with our two guests, Ed Scott-Clarke, who's the director of the film eLife that you might have already watched and enjoyed as much as I did, and Ita McMahon. Ita is a member of our investment team, and I'll be speaking to Ita a little bit about the thoughtful investor approach that we take on at Castlefield. Before we talk about eLife, I would like to welcome Ita to talk to us about this approach. Ita's role at Castlefield is to engage with companies that we invest in and that form a part of the client's investment portfolios on environmental, social and governance issues and concerns. So without any further delay, I'll welcome Ita. Thank you for your time and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Pooja, and thanks for inviting me today.
Ita, we've got a few questions for you, and some of the questions have come in from our viewers, and I've added one question in just from me as well in this. So my first question is, Ed's documentary obviously highlights the environmental problems associated with e-waste. How does Castlefield address environmental issues in their investment process?
Well, we know that Castlefield's clients are concerned about a range of environmental problems, including the issues that are highlighted in the documentary. And we take those concerns very seriously when it comes to our investments. So we don't invest in fossil fuels or in extractive industries, for example. And we look really closely at the environmental footprint of the companies that we do invest in. And we also use our influence as investors to encourage companies to set themselves ambitious targets to reduce their environmental impacts. Plus, we look to invest in companies that provide solutions to current environmental problems.
Thank you, Ita. Can you tell us some more about the companies, like for examples, what companies would feature in our clients' portfolios?
Blanco is a really good example. It's a company that very securely erases data from electronic equipment like hard drives and phones so that there's no risk of that data being recovered. And that means that those PCs and laptops can be sold or donated and used again. And effectively that extends the useful life of computers and phones and so on, which clearly has environmental benefits. We also invest in testing and inspection companies like Marlowe, which provide air quality testing, the removal of hazardous waste like asbestos and so on. And essentially, they help corporate clients to adhere to health, safety and environmental legislation. And finally, we hold a company called Signify, which is a company that's doing great pioneering work on the circular economy. It's a lighting company providing lighting for offices, commercial premises, and even outdoor lighting. A sustainable design sits at the heart of the business, and when its designers are designing new products, they think upfront about how the product can be dismantled at the end of its life in order for the glass, metal, plastic, and so on in the lighting system to be reused. And currently about 80% of their components can be reused, which is pretty impressive.
That is very impressive. Thank you, Ita. Just a last one. In general, it seems like a lot of companies are doing more to address environmental impacts. Is that what you see as well as a part of your role when you're engaging with these companies?
Yeah, definitely. More enlightened companies are recognizing that there's demand for sustainable products or solutions to help businesses monitor their environmental impact. So, for example, we invest in SAP, and they've been doing some really innovative work which will help companies map the carbon footprint of their supply chains. So we're definitely seeing a shift in thinking, and as investors, it's our job to applaud that.
That is encouraging to know. So thank you, Ita. Thank you for answering all of those questions as well. Without further ado, I would now like to welcome Ed Scott-Clarke. Ed's the director of eLife, and we at Castlefield are proud to have provided the seed grant for this incredible project and to showcase this powerful documentary. Welcome, Ed. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Hi there, Pooja. It's a pleasure, and thank you so much to Castlefield for providing that seed grant. Without it, it's doubtful the film would have been able to take off.
So, Ed, eLife is a film that uncovers the growing global problem of electronic waste. It covers a story about a shipment that carries hazardous waste and is going from Europe and the US, and it ends up on the shores of developing countries. So you and your team, you visited a scrapyard in Ghana and captured how the local people are often unprepared to deal with tons of waste, risking fatal illnesses and shocking levels of soil contamination. If you don't mind, we'll play the trailer now, and I hope all of you enjoy it.
I have said that the poor people of Africa cannot manage Europe or America's waste. If we all belong to a global community, then why will any government sit down and watch this hazardous waste being transported or exported to a poor country like Africa? For me, I see it as a deliberate attempt by the West to dump obsolete technology and hazardous materials on Africa because they think that the solution in their respective countries are more expensive and it's cheaper to bring it down here to Africa. And so I get really angry because if e-waste is hazardous waste, then somebody must pay for its management. And if you're not ready to pay and rather dump it on somebody else, then you are not being fair. When you have such massive smoke from e-waste burning, I mean, for such a long time, there is definitely going to be human health consequences. I mean, you can guess by just mere looking at it that about 70% of the people who are impacted by these e-waste activities are women and children. They are in the majority of people who come here. Some really have nothing to do with the e-waste, but we must begin to think more carefully, so that one day another generation will not rise up and say it is the West that have killed developing countries. You see, situations like this must not be allowed to continue.
The trailer is very powerful and thought-provoking. Ed, I've got a question for you. With your experience while making this film and your visit to Ghana, what was it like and what was the inspiration to make this film?
So it was a long and very drawn out process. It took probably about 4 years from beginning to end, from finding the seed funding, which Castlefield very kindly put up, all the way through to finally releasing it in 2017. I'm just going to talk a little bit now about how we kind of put that together, the film, why we put together the film, and also generally about the context of e-waste, which I'm sure you all absolutely love to hear because you are listening. So I'm just going to share my screen. Give me 2 seconds. So yeah, so I just want to start really by saying that tech isn't bad. Like everyone, I presume as you're watching this, has a computer. You probably also has a mobile phone, and according to stats, that smartphone, that's likely to be a smartphone less than 2 years old. You probably also have tablets, Bluetooth headphones, maybe a smartwatch, and all those inventions kind of have changed the way we live, how we interact, access information, and are helping us solve some of the most complex issues of our time. And of course, they've given us probably what we use tech for most, which is watching cat videos on the internet and, of course, entertainment. But what eLife is about is what happens when that tech kind of reaches the end of its functioning life. E-waste, as broken electronics are the fastest growing waste stream in the world, and a subject that not many people really know about. The idea came about through a conversation with my friend Hugh, who's second from left in this picture here, which is part of the crew from eLife in Ghana. And Hugh's a journalist who had a brother that lived in Ghana who had visited this scrapyard, Abablushi. It's probably the most infamous e-waste site in the world. Even by the time we visited in 2013, there had been several articles and documentaries on it that had provocative names like e-waste hell and that kind of stuff. And so we did a bit of research and decided to continue our run on e-waste documentaries. The first one we'd done together was Plastic Shores, which is all about plastic pollution in the world's oceans, and do one on e-waste. And so eLife was born. The last kind of global comprehensive study of e-waste was done by the United Nations University in 2017, and they said that the year before we produced 44.7 million tons of e-waste, and you can see there what kind of type of e-waste we're talking about. That was an 8% rise on 2014, and they estimated by last year it would be 50 million tons. And of that, 1 million tons of it, so 1 million tons out of 44.7, was just the chargers that we used to plug in our phones, our TVs and the like. That's a larger growth than any other domestic waste stream, and it may be kind of hard to visualize. So imagine it as 4,500 Eiffel Towers thrown away each year of electronic waste. But only 41 countries quantify their e-waste generation and recycling streams officially, the fate of a large majority of e-waste, like 3/4, is simply unknown. Europe generates the second largest per person, 16.6 kilograms per person thrown away every year. Oceania comes in first, and unfortunately the UK is the worst offender in Europe at about 25 kilograms per person of e-waste thrown away each year. And what kind of a recycling does, what the infrastructure is looking for, is value. It takes a lot of materials, elements to make electronics. A smartphone, for example, requires over half of the 118 elements in the periodic table to be manufactured, including 16 of the 17 rare earth metals. And all those elements have value if we can extract them. That same report estimated the total value of all those materials in discarded e-waste in 2016 was 55 billion euros, which is roughly equivalent to the GDP of Luxembourg. And what formal recycling facilities are looking for is the best way to extract that value. They're also the safest, as it's not just inert, benign elements like gold and copper in technology. There are more kind of sinister but industrially useful elements in there, things like cadmium, arsenic, mercury, lead, and chromium. And being exposed to these elements is linked to everything from cancer to breathing problems, developmental defects, and brain damage. So protecting your workforce from exposure is essential, and that's kind of where it starts. You know, this all costs. We can currently recover about half of those elements in tech manufacture today, but extracting those elements requires really expensive technology. You also have the expense of protecting your workers and the environment, which means some recyclers, the minority, look to kind of offload their waste to places that will process it for less money. And this is not uncommon. It's estimated that about a quarter of all e-waste is exported to developing countries each year. At the time of eLife, China processed about 70% of the world's e-waste. in one of its largest informal e-waste sites was thought to be Guiyu, which processed 15,000 tons of e-waste a day. And safeguards were few and far between, as you can see by this clip here. But we focused on Agbogbloshie, which has become somewhat of the poster child of the e-waste problem. Agbogbloshie is essentially a scrapyard. You'll find everything there from cars to white goods to gaming machines to domestic appliances. The scrapyard provides for about 80,000 workers and their families, most of whom have come from northern Ghana down to the capital in search for work. And when we filmed there in 2013, it had been ranked in the top 10 most toxic sites on the planet, alongside Chernobyl, and that was because of the hazardous materials in e-waste. It's a bit of a dirty secret. It took a lot to get film permits, and even when we were there, we were followed by Ghanaian security, and it took a lot for our fixer to get them to allow us to kind of enter the site. Only a few months beforehand, a couple of Dutch journalists were apparently kind of beaten up and had their kit smashed and thrown off the site. So we knew it was going to be a kind of a bit of a difficult thing to get access. It is also the largest scrapyard in Accra. So for many people, the hazards that came with the processing of all the waste the benefit of the processing of the waste was kind of outweighed it. We had very little money, so we stayed in a really rundown hotel in kind of a dodgy part of Accra where there weren't many tourists at all. Security was a guard sleeping across the front of the door so that nobody can come in at night time. But from its roof, we got a really good view of Agbogbloshie, which you can see from this video here. It's chaotic, it's loud, and it's a bit of an assault on the senses, like the overbearing smell of burning plastic and chemicals kind of makes it a really kind of toxic kind of smell. And the first time we visited, we had to pay our respects to the chief of the site, and we had to get him, and to get to him we had to navigate through these kind of like mounds of pinball machines and keyboards and something. It's like some kind of dystopian city. But there is kind of order in the chaos, and the process goes a little something like this. So you get kids like these ones who go through Accra picking up electronic waste from kind of homes and businesses, and they bring it back to the site where they distribute it amongst workers who pick it apart for their precious metals, mostly copper. And the richest source of copper is in the wires, so they bundle up the wires into balls and they burn them to get the plastic coating off. It creates a lower grade copper, but it's perfectly sellable, and they sell it on to metal buyers. And there's very little safety gear to do this. You'll see many of the young people on the burning sites wearing nothing more than flip-flops. I walked across an old burning site which hadn't been used for days when I was there, and it completely melted the bottom of my walking boots. So you can imagine what it's like in the flip-flops, and you can see this kid here at the front standing on the scorched earth wearing just flip-flops. This is a photo of a worker's leg. This is actually Karim, the foreman, who was our kind of guide when we were there. He started working there when he was 14. He was 13 when we met him. And these scars are common for those who kind of burn and dismantle on the site. When we were there, someone actually lost their eye by shrapnel kind of pinging off burning electronics when we were there. But these scars actually mask, the real damage from working at a site like Agbogbloshie. When we were there, we were shown around by a scientist called Samson Atiyamo, who was doing research on the toxicity on the site. So Samson on the left. He released a paper in 2012 that showed levels of zinc, lead, and cadmium were over 1,000 times more than the levels required for intervention under UN rules. And a more recent study co-authored by the Basel Action Network in the US found that if you ate a single egg laid by a free-range chicken in Agbogbloshie, you would exceed European Food Safety Authority limits on chlorinated dioxins by 220 times. So pretty toxic. But toxic poisoning is extremely difficult to diagnose. Even if the workers at Agbogbloshie had access to basic healthcare, which they don't because they don't have insurance, Samson told us that many of the symptoms, headaches, nausea, that kind of stuff, are simply misdiagnosed as malaria. And anecdotally, we were told of workers who just returned home up north and passed away at a young age up there. There have been several attempts to clear the site, unsuccessfully, because there is no formal recycling in Ghana. Sites at Abuja are the only way that this e-waste can be processed, and close it down and somewhere else will just kind of pop up. Much of the discarded tech comes from Ghana itself, despite kind of what's commonly thought. But Ghana has a thriving reuse economy, unlike in the UK, for example, particularly when it comes to electronics. New tech is really expensive, so second-hand tech is highly sought after. According to Samson, 70% of imported technology is actually second-hand, and 20% of that is just junk, which is probably destined for the repair market, which is also more developed in Ghana than it is in the UK. But under international law, this type of repair export is illegal. To ship it, it needs to be plugged in and working. So yeah, that's pretty much my kind of overview of the film. Like, it was a fantastic process. We went down there twice. Ghana is a beautiful country. It's a shame it's a place like Abuja kind of like tarnishes its reputation. But it's we're hoping that a film like eLife raised just a little bit of awareness about how responsible we need to be for our electronic waste.
Thank you, Ed. That's really interesting. And the photos and the slides you've shared with us as well, they're really good. Obviously, the movie captures a lot of the story, but these photos just bring it all to light as well. So thank you for that presentation. If you don't mind, I have a few questions for you. We've got some questions coming in from our viewers that I'd like to ask you. The first question, it is very topical because disposable fast fashion and a flood of low-cost electronics have created a short-term consumer mindset. What measures do you think could be introduced by, say, firms or governments or maybe even schools to reframe this and encourage the reuse and recycling of goods, as you were saying? Also, have there been any significant changes, positive or negative, to the problem of e-waste dumping since the documentary was made?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I find that yes, there is a very short-term mindset, and that is only going to get worse as 5G rolls out. 5G obviously relies upon vast amounts of small interconnecting mobile connected devices in order to coordinate. So there is definitely quite a bleak horizon in terms of e-waste, but there is also increasing kind of consumer awareness about the effects of our consumption, which I think particularly in the past 5 years, with on the back of the Paris Climate Accord and that kind of thing about what we do with our waste and how we live. And I think it's kind of a multi-pronged approach. I totally think that it's both companies, investors, government and consumers that all put weight to the change. I think on Castlefield side of things, for example, if more people make sure that they only invest in companies that are doing the right thing, then that is a massive step. Money talks. There are also amazing organisations like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation who are working directly with manufacturers to try and get them to fundamentally change the way they make things. And massive companies, like Dell and Apple and all this kind of stuff are now waking up to the fact that they have to be responsible for their products after they're thrown away. So I think things are changing. I think there is a lot of negative stories out there, so it's quite difficult to see the positive, but I am more optimistic now than I was definitely at the time when eLife came out. And then in terms of what's changed on the e-waste side of things since eLife, I mean, quite a lot. I mean, when eLife was made, only 40% of the nations around the world had e-waste legislation, and that's up to 2/3 of the world's population now is now covered by some form of e-waste legislation. China has banned the importing of solid waste, including e-waste, in 2017. Kenya intends to do it. It's obviously they're still producing their own e-waste, so that's still a difficulty. But as the avenue for wealthier nations to export their e-waste abroad are getting narrower and narrower. So yeah, I think there's light on the horizon, but there's still a lot of dark before we get there.
Thanks, Ed. And there was a recent program on Radio 4 about how big ships like cruise liners ended up on beaches of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and they were being taken apart by hand. There were images of that as well. And there were no environmental or human protection that you could see through the images or when you read the article. I was shocked to learn that sometimes these ships are owned by UK investment funds and then sold to cash buyers near the end of their life to avoid disposing of them responsibly under the EU law. So do you see any parallels between the shipping industry and the tech waste industry as you've examined in eLife?
Yeah, I think there are definitely parallels, but also big differences. Ships are massive kind of like items unto themselves, and the big difference, I suppose, is that ships are operational at the point of sale. So they have to be sailed to India or Bangladesh or whatever it is. And that is just a matter of unscrupulous traders, sort of passing the buck. E-waste is slightly different in the sense that not everyone has a ship in their backyard. This is a consumer problem, I think, more than anything else, and it can be solved by consumer awareness. Whereas the shipping side of things, I think, will need governmental and corporate kind of intervention. But they are very similar in the sense that ships have a huge amount of electronics on board. There's a huge amount of potentially toxic materials that go into the making of a ship. And just as it is with e-waste, and they are destined for an informal economy that have no regulations or protections for the workers that are processing this stuff. So they, in that sense, they are very similar. The thing about ships as well is that they're not classified as a toxic waste unto themselves. So they don't fall under the Basel Convention, which is the big kind of toxic waste legislation that happens, that is in existence at the moment. So it's kind of, there are parallels, but there are big differences as well.
Thanks, Ed. Fairphone is a great example of what also needs to happen in terms of products being repairable. This needs to be in more than just electronics, though our society and producers all seem to be focused on replace rather than repair. For example, we have this question come in from someone who's viewing the program at the moment. When their last washing machine died, they couldn't get it repaired for love nor money. And the only repairer they found for the washing machine said it would cost them more to repair it than replace it. This paradigm needs to change too. And how do you think we can make that happen from your experience when you've seen this with what happens with e-waste? What do you think?
Again, it's a consumer shift that I think is underway, and it is a corporate shift that is underway at the moment. There's new EU legislation being enacted which counters planned obsolescence. Things have to last a certain amount of time. People are waking up to the fact that disposable, sort of white goods and electronics is not a good thing. I think this all ties into, for decades now, we've been in this kind of freewheeling, sort of hyper-consumerist kind of society because we've been managing to extract enough resources to be able to sustain it. That's not going to go on indefinitely. We're already running out of certain kind of elements around the world that are required for electronics manufacture. In fact, the BBC did a program a few years back that kind of looked at certain minerals and when they'll run out if extraction trends continue. And there's silver was expected to go out in to run out in 9 years' time, and antimony was expected to go out run out this year. Of course, it doesn't kind of quite work out like that because you find new deposits and new extraction technologies make it more efficient and that kind of stuff. But it kind of highlights the fact that these elements aren't infinite, which means that once they start running out, it puts pressure on manufacturers to start limiting the amount they use. It also increases the likelihood of things like landfill mining. The US EPA said that 1 metric ton of circuit boards can contain up to 40 to 800 times the amount of gold and 30 to 40 times the amount of copper mined from 1 metric ton of ore in the United States. So there's all this stuff that we're throwing away that still has value, and as soon as it starts running out naturally, we're going to be forced to adapt. And one of the ways we're going to have to do that is thinking of repairability and modularity in mind. So I think it does feel pretty bleak, and I think the market's almost kind of polarized right now. You've got the cheap tacky manufacturers who are mass consuming tap basically that will have a very short lifespan, and then you've got the big players like Philips, who are making real headway in designing for repairability. They've got buyback schemes and that kind of stuff. So I think the lesson to be had, even though it costs more, buy a reputable quality brand rather than cheap tacky one, because you are going to be disappointed when that comes to an end.
Thanks, Ed. Just one more question. Do you think the rules around exporting electrical waste have been affected post-Brexit? Because previously it was illegal under the EU law to send to non-EU countries. Do you think that's changed?
Not yet. I mean, the thing is, the EU laws were tethered very closely to the Basel Convention, which is the United Nations Convention. The UK is still a signatory of the Basel Convention, and our laws are still very much based on the laws that were in place pre-Brexit. So at the moment, no. Whether regulations will be loosened in the future is another thing. I can't see it happening. It creates a lot more of a firestorm now, hearing about stories about the UK dumping waste on sort of poorer nations than it used to. There's a lot more awareness about it, and also the recipient nations are far more likely to kick up a fuss and send it back if it's discovered. So I can't see, particularly on the e-waste side of things, any change in direction. In the UK, the body that is responsible for kind of monitoring e-waste has got pretty savvy to how people are exporting, and have clamped down really heavily on it. It comes with quite a hefty fine now and jail time. So it's I can't comment for what's going to happen in the future, but at the moment it seems like we're going to stick with the safeguards that we had pre-Brexit.
Thanks, Ed. That was really good to know, because obviously post-Brexit everyone's worried about these aspects as well. So that is a positive response that you provided us. Just on the point about regulations as well, this question might be more directed at the investment team at Castlefield. So Ita, if you don't mind, I'd like to call on you to answer this question. E-waste is an obvious problem, and with our discussion with Ed, it's come to light how big a problem it is as well. It is a poorly regulated industry, although things are changing. But what about Castlefield? How is Castlefield involved in this? And obviously we have an association with the firm as well. So what do you think is Castlefield's take on this?
Well, in terms of why we got involved in the project, we did it as a way of raising awareness of broader environmental issues, in this case e-waste, which doesn't get all that much coverage in the UK. Ed's touched on this point as well, but the documentary is a really good reminder of the urgent need to move to a circular economy so that there's financial value here in the UK in reusing materials and electronic components instead of throwing them away.
Thanks, Ita. Thank you very much. And a special thanks to both of you, and thank you, Ed, for being a part of this conversation with us as well. It's been wonderful talking to you both, and it's been really insightful. Ed, thank you for making the time for this discussion. We look forward to more films like eLife from you, and wish you the best with your future projects as well. Before we sign off, I just want to end on a note by saying that without a doubt, in the recent years, there has been relatively a stark shift in the way in which global environmental issues are being viewed. People now are more invested in the environment than they were before, which is a great shift. But ultimately, though, the world is leaning towards an acceptance of importance of environmental preservation. And there is a lot of work that still remains and that needs to be done. And it is for this reason why businesses need to take more notice of the impact they have on the environment. And this is where thoughtful investors like yourselves are at the heart of this change. And I do feel like the work that we can do on behalf of investors who have responsible thinking as their key goal in the investment process, we can make this change happen. So thank you to everyone for being a part of this conversation. We'll be signing off on this note. If you do have any questions for Ed, please do feel free to send them on to us and we'll forward it to Ed. Enjoy the rest of your day and stay safe and take care of yourselves.